My daughter-in-law snapped harshly. Don't count on getting a single cent of your son's $30 million. Her tone dripped with disdain, treating me like some wretched pauper instead of his own dad. Yet at the will's reading, her face went ashen the instant the attorney mentioned my name. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The tool dropped from my grease-covered hands right when that physician's words hit me. It struck the cement with a piercing clang that reverberated around my workshop like a rifle shot. Mr. Fox, I'm sorry to inform you of devastating news regarding your son, Chad. He experienced a severe cardiac arrest this morning at work. The phrase echoed in my head without sinking in. Chad, cardiac arrest. My kid was just 42. I slumped against the workshop wall until I reached the ground, the chill of the floor seeping through my overalls to my spine. Sir, are you still on the line? I'm here. My response came out empty as if echoing from a distant place. When did it occur? About 11 a.m. His assistant discovered him at his workstation. The emergency team tried all they could, but he was already lost. Already lost? The word stabbed into my heart like a blade. I gazed at the belly of my ancient Ford truck. Dark spots charting decades of fixes. For 36 years I'd been under engines like this, mending what was damaged. But this was beyond repair. Mr. Fox will require someone to handle the plans. Is there kin we ought to reach? His spouse, Joyce. The word left a sour tang. I'll contact her. After ending the call, I remained seated for what seemed an eternity, though likely mere moments. The midday warmth seeped in via the open bay, bringing the aroma of Lone Star dirt and engine lubricant. The scene appeared identical to earlier that day, yet nothing would ever return to normal. I hauled myself upright on unsteady limbs and headed to my tool station. Beside a tin of bolts, there rested a framed snapshot of 8-year-old Chad clutching a base he'd snagged at Lake Meredith. His toothless smile could have lit up the entire space. That kid had beamed with pride over that tiny fish, scarcely larger than his palm. My cell felt weighty as I punched in Joyce's digits. It jumped right to her message. This is Joyce Fox. I'm unavailable at the moment, but kindly leave a thorough note and I'll respond when possible. Even her recording came off as detached, businesslike, more like addressing a device than relatives. Joyce, Otis here. I just learned about Chad. Ring me back soon as you can. We must discuss the plans. I attempted again after 20 minutes. Identical outcome. Then once more an hour on. By the 6th try, my palms trembled with a blend of fury and hopelessness. Joyce, this marks my 6th outreach. I know you're around. I realize we clash, but this goes beyond us now. Please just return my call. I hurled the device at the workshop barrier. It ricocheted and skittered over the floor, the back panel flying off. The ensuing quiet loomed vast, bearing down on my ears like ocean depths. The image of Chad gazed at me from the station. In it, he remained my young lad. Prior to commerce studies, before the West Coast, before Joyce, before the gap that widened between us, like untamed growth in an abandoned plot, I gathered the fragments of my phone and reassembled it. The display now bore a fracture slicing across, but it functioned still, much like the rest of my existence. Battered yet operational. The choice built gradually, akin to corrosion spreading on steel. I couldn't linger in this workshop awaiting Joyce's verdict on my value for a callback. Chad was my boy, my sole offspring. Margaret and I had yearned for him endlessly. Felt such thankfulness when he arrived. I yanked my worn canvas sack from the storage and began stuffing it. 3 outfits, my grooming set, Chad's picture. My arms worked on autopilot as my thoughts grappled with my altered reality. No further weekend chats where Chad shared his newest property venture in that eager tone, echoing the child who'd landed that base. No additional holiday greetings with images of him before ever grander residences. The journey to Los Angeles would demand 12 hours if I pressed hard. I'd made it once prior for Chad's commerce graduation. That era when Joyce still feigned acceptance of me, before she deemed me unfit for their upscale existence. I tucked Chad's photo gently amid 2 garments. The pane had a minor split in one edge from when I'd fumbled the frame ages ago. I'd never fixed it. Now I regretted that. Beyond, the sun dipped low, casting elongated shades in my workshop. Come dawn, I'd secure this spot and head westward to a son I'd never behold again, and a daughter-in-law who'd prefer I vanished. But this evening I perched on my station and wept for the small boy so thrilled with that fish. The pickup's door banged closed as dawn's initial glow tinted the Texas heavens rose. I'd passed the night filling and refilling the bag, keeping my hands occupied while my brain whirled endlessly. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, peeked from her cooking area pane as I stowed the final items, her features etched with worry. I offered a salute but didn't pause for chat. How do you convey to folks your entire universe just crumbled? The roadway extended forward like a strip of unwanted opportunity. Route 40 would guide me across New Mexico, Arizona, and at last to California. 12 hours behind the wheel with only my reflections and phantoms of talks I'd never share with Chad anew. Distance blurred past in arid vistas. The broadcast delivered AM road updates and forecast for a planet that persisted turning regardless. I stretched for the knob, then withdrew. Quiet seemed truer somehow. Near Albuquerque's outskirts, a recollection struck suddenly. Chad at 8, positioned in our rear yard with a mitt oversized for his grip. Margaret pinned clothes to the cord behind, murmuring a tune I couldn't recall. "But when'll I grow as tall as you?" Chad inquired, peering up through the midday glare. "Grasp the sphere with both paws, kid. You'll arrive." I'd crouched to his height, tweaking his hold. "Just focus on the ball, regardless of its speed." He bobbed his head with the gravity youngsters apply to vital matters. We likely spent 60 minutes flinging that ball while Margaret's linens fluttered in the wind like pale banners of defeat. The reminiscence slammed so fiercely I needed to halt at a wayside area. I lingered in the lot, clutching the wheel as tears fogged my sight. When did we cease tossing the ball? When did he grow too occupied for his paw? "Lengthy trip onward, old-timer." The fuel stop clerk, barely past his teens with gentle eyes evoking Chad at that stage, heading to visit my boy. The phrase escaped unbidden, though I suppose I've missed the chance. The youth's look altered, grasping without elaboration. "Condolences, mister. Travel carefully." On the road again, another recollection emerged. Chad at 25, phoning to boast of his initial major property transaction. His words buzzed with thrill, reminiscent of when he'd perfected a fresh pitch. "Pa, I sealed my largest agreement so far, a $2 million spot in Beverly Hills." I'd been in that identical workshop buried in a local's gearbox. "That's cash beyond my lifetime's earnings, son. Perhaps you ought to visit. Witness what I've created here." But I never did. Always another vehicle to mend. Another reason to remain in Texas where life was logical. Where I needn't fake knowledge of fancy drinks or fret over misspeaking to Joyce's posh crowd. The terrain shifted westward. Texas flats yielded to New Mexico sands, then Arizona peaks. Every kilometer distanced me from familiar days, and neared a realm where my son had existed and perished without me truly grasping his evolution. By dusk, Los Angeles expanded ahead like a glowing circuit panel. Highway markers directed to Beverly Hills, to locales in another realm from my Amarillo Bay. My rig seemed diminished, overshadowed by premium vehicles streaming like herds of costly creatures. Chad's area was a labyrinth of flawless turf and dwellings resembling galleries more than abodes. Each entryway cradled autos valued above my last half-decade's income. Palms bordered the lanes like guardians, their leaves whispering in a gust scented with wealth and mysteries. I located the spot and rolled up to barriers fit for a fortress. Past the metal rods, I spied a manor that could swallow 3 of my homes with space remaining. This was my son's residence. This was the realm he'd selected over family meals and yard games. The motor clicked while cooling. The lone noise in this flawless hush. I inspected my reflection in the mirror. Labor top creased from the trek. Whiskers from a restless eve. Eyes rimmed red with sorrow and weariness. Hardly the picture of a Beverly Hills in-law, but I'd arrived. After 12 hours of recollections and remorse, I'd made it. I inhaled deeply, sampling the strange atmosphere of my son's picked domain, and grasped the handle. The automated barrier hummed like a furious hornet as I neared the speaker. Stone pillars guarded the entry, each likely valued over my yearly retirement payout. Through the grates, I viewed a rounded drive with a spring in the middle, liquid leaping in the amber twilight. I hit the switch and lingered. Deep within that estate, Joyce pondered if I merited her attention. "What is it?" Her words crackled via the device, keen enough to slice. "Joyce Otis speaking. I traveled from Texas. We must address Chad." Quiet extended like a strained cable. I envisioned her in some control hub, weighing if recognizing me warranted the effort. "Why are you here, Otis?" "I came for Chad. We need to plan the memorial. I can manage it all alone." Returned to Texas, the barrier held firm. Behind, lights auto-ignited the grounds, morphing the estate into a tale's vision or horror, based on viewpoint. "I know we disagree, but now's not for that." I maintained calm like soothing a client suspecting deceit. He was my child, too. Another extended break. Then the barrier swung inward with robotic accuracy. Okay, but clean your shoes prior to entering. I stationed my grimy rig beside a Mercedes worth more than my abode. The difference was nearly laughable, like a stray at a pedigree event. I doffed my cap and smoothed my silver locks, aiming for decency amid the impending trial. Joyce greeted me at the entrance, and I conceded. She appeared composed for a fresh widow, tailored ebony gown with a likely European label, cosmetics flawlessly set, every strand aligned. She scanned me as if I were filth on her soul. "You appear awful," she remarked as welcome. "It's been an exhausting day." She pivoted and strode inward sans further comment, her stilettos tapping on stone tiles extending to a vaulted roof fit for acrobats. I trailed, striving not to stare at the glittering fixtures and pieces fit for exhibits. All was ivory and gilt and immaculate, like a resort foyer meant to daunt. "Take a seat." She motioned to a parlor rivaling my home's size. The pieces seemed untouched, arrayed about a table carved from one stone block. I eased onto a sofa likely pricier than my vehicle. My labor footwear absurd against exotic carpets costing more than average rides. Joyce stayed upright, holding the advantage in every sense. "I've begun the preparations," she stated, her manner implying I was an irksome disruption. "The mortuary, the ceremony, all of it. It's managed. What of interment? Chad never shared his wishes. He'll be incinerated. It's efficient." She uttered it like scheduling refuse collection. "There's truly no role for you, Otis. I value the trip, but I can oversee it solo." I surveyed the space, absorbing the panorama through towering panes revealing a rear with courts and a basin. This was my son's creation, his elected sphere. Remarkable, I admitted. Also frigid as a tomb. When's the ceremony? Friday. Intimate, exclusive, merely select associates. The implication obvious. You're excluded. But I'd journeyed 12 hours and wouldn't be brushed off like a solicitor. "Joyce, I seek little, just to bid farewell to my lad." For once since my arrival, a spark crossed her features. Not kindness per se, but perhaps awareness of facing a person. Not a bother. "Fine. Friday at 2:1 Sunset Memorial Chapel on Wilshire Boulevard." She settled opposite, balanced on her seat's rim as if ready to flee. "But this alters nothing between us." I never anticipated otherwise. We lingered in lavish quiet. Through the glass, city gleams started sparkling below. Out there, folks led ordinary existences, fretting routine woes. I coveted that. I ought to seek lodging, I rose. "I'll return tomorrow if matters need talk." Joyce escorted me out, keeping space as if I carried plague. At the doorway, she halted. "Otis, Chad amassed a substantial fortune. I'll oversee his ventures, naturally. Much to handle." Her delivery sounded like a caution, staking claims I shouldn't breach. I nodded and returned to my rig, sensing her gaze until past the barrier. Departing that estate, I glimpsed it in the mirror, illuminated like a liner in night. My son had dwelled there, trod those stone paths, gazed from those panes. He'd forged this existence, this wealth, this ideal realm, and amid it all, no spot for his paw. The stone ground chilled under my tired boots as Joyce guided me further into Chad's domain. Each footfall resounded in the vast corridor, rebounding from surfaces adorned with pieces likely worth my residence. She proceeded with the assurance of one possessing all she contacted, her heels ticking like a timer to the unavoidable. This was Chad's workspace, she noted, shoving wide oak panels. He devoted most hours here lately. The chamber stole my breath. Vast windows surveyed urban illuminations, and each plane shone with triumphs I'd never seen up close. Accolades filled racks. Images depicted Chad clasping hands with suited figures, a grand workstation ruling the core like a shrine to victory. Joyce lifted a glass holder with a shot of Chad at a benefit affair, them in formal attire costing over my rig. He adored these gatherings. We formed quite the influential duo. I examined the image. Chad appeared changed from our last meet, slimmer, aged somehow, though beaming for the lens. He never spoke of these bashes. Chad rarely discussed his social scene with. She stopped, allowing the words to dangle like a dagger. Well, he was occupied. Approaching his station, she extracted documents and planners. "We must conclude the plans. The mortuary requires choices this evening. What of entombment? Margaret rests at Rose Hill back home. Chad visited her plot as a youth." Joyce's chuckle cut like shattering crystal. "Chad preferred incineration, not entombment. He mentioned it often. No, The denial emerged firmer than planned. He expressed wanting beside his mom in the yard. You haven't known his desires lately, Otis. Anger surged in my core. Perhaps, but I knew him 42 years, you two. Her grin could chill liquid. 2 as his spouse. That outweighs years as a remote parent. The barbs struck like strikes. I clutched Chad's station edge, sensing the sleek timber under rough skin. Each prize, each honor, each emblem of triumph glared like arbiters deeming me lacking. See this. Joyce brandished Chad's device, browsing entries. Associates, backers, club pals, 200 figures who counted to him. Now she skimmed disdainfully, erasing those she judged unfit. This one hasn't met Chad lately. This is merely a links contact. We'll maintain the event modest, refined. I observed her shrink my son's ties to ticks on her exclusive roster. Each removal felt like Chad fading further. Another link cut by her verdict. What of his university mates? The boys from his youth. Those folks don't match the portrayal we're offering. Portrayal, not recollection, not affection, not homage to the departed. Portrayal. Joyce phoned directors as I occupied a hide seat, likely exceeding my stipend. Her talks were sharp, expert, centered on details over mourning. She debated blooms like selecting produce, picked tunes like wall decor. Viewing Thursday night, right Friday p.m., she declared, disconnecting. All set, may I add something? Aid with expenses? Another frosty chuckle. Otis, this right will exceed your biennial earnings. Fret not over funds. I'll manage Chad's monetary affairs henceforth. Her phrasing chilled my flesh as if she already disbursed unclaimed sums. We resolved particulars through clenched jaws and feigned courtesy. Incineration over entombment, lavish blooms over plain, a roster purged of those recalling the youth Chad was. As we wrapped, Joyce led me out with the triumph of a victor in all bouts. I'll address fiscal talks with attorneys post this mournful affair. Much to oversee, but rest easy. I'll handle it all. At the entry, I glanced back once at the estate that housed my son. Amid that stone and glass and triumph, there ought to have been hints of the lad who'd hooked that base, who'd flung that ball, who'd named me Dad, but all visible was Joyce's image in the glossy plains, repeated infinitely like a mirror maze displaying the identical icy grin. The portal shut behind with a noise like a safe locking. The glowing marquee of Desert Inn Motel pulsed like a fading pulse as I steered my truck into the fractured lot. The joint seemed time forgotten. Coating flaking from block walls, plants thrusting through pavement, worlds from the stone fortress I'd exited. But the rate suited my benefits, and no one here would scorn my soiled footwear. Unit 12 reeked of stale tobacco and heavy cleanser. The cover appeared unchanged since the 80s, and the cooler gasped like an elder ascending steps. I dropped onto the mattress rim, sensing coils yield beneath. From my billfold, I drew 2 images. Margaret at 25, glowing in her bridal gown. Beside a youthful guy with full locks and optimism. Beside it, Chad at his nuptials 2 years past, grinning anxiously as Joyce struck a pose like a glossy spread. That ceremony, I should have recognized her nature then. The recollection bubbled like sludge on liquid, murky and inescapable. Spring day in Beverly Hills, pricey pale seats on trimmed sod. I'd donned my lone suit, the one for Margaret's send-off, and sensed its shabbiness amid Chad's fresh circle. Certain of this, son? I'd queried in a calm instant. Chad fiddled with his neckwear, anxious vibe pouring off like warmth. Pa, I'm joyful first time post-split. She revives my youth. Across the green, Joyce postured with her mannequin pals, all limbs and flawless grins and deliberate allure. One murmured, and they glanced my direction. Look at his dad, Joyce's companion said, audible enough. Chad's ashamed of him. Joyce tittered, a chime and a gale. What did you anticipate? Separate universes. I'd noted how she eyed my faded attire, my rough palms, my grip on the bubbly flute like it could shatter. To her, I was a vestige from Chad's history that couldn't be discarded but surely concealed. The lodge line trilled, jolting me from reverie. No one held this digit save I eyed the timepiece. Beyond midnight. Otis, what's occurred, pal? It's after midnight here. Harlan's tone pierced the hush like a rescue. Chad's past heron, cardiac, and his wife. She's unlike our Margaret. Apologies, old friend. How you managing? I fixed on the ceiling's moisture marks, hunting terms for emotions I barely comprehended. She acts like I'm grime under her luxury heels, makes me sense like a trespasser at my child's right. That lady lacks grace despite her riches. Worst is, I believe Chad realized lately. He sounded altered on calls, removed like regretting unspoken things. Harlan's breathing was steady on the other end. The sound of a friend letting silence do the talking when words weren't enough. "You need me to come out there?" he asked finally. "No, this is something I have to face alone." "But Harlan, what if I failed him? What if I let that woman turn him against everything we taught him?" "Otis Fox, you listen to me. You raised a good boy who turned into a successful man. Don't let some gold digger make you question 42 years of being a father." After hanging up, I lay in the darkness listening to traffic on the freeway, the city humming like a machine that never slept. In a few hours, I'd have to get up and face Joyce again, play nice for Chad's funeral, pretend we were family instead of strangers connected by grief and genetics. Margaret's photo caught the streetlight from the window. If she were here, she'd know what to say to Joyce, how to handle this situation with grace instead of stumbling through it like I was doing. Margaret had possessed a quiet strength that could shame devils into behaving like angels. But Margaret was gone and Chad was gone, and I was alone in a cheap motel room, trying to figure out how to bury my son with dignity, while his widow treated me like hired help. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, all I could do was hold on to Margaret's memory and hope it would give me strength for whatever Joyce had planned next. The alarm clock glowed 12:47 a.m. As I finally closed my eyes, the morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Eternal Rest Funeral Home as I straightened my only black tie in the truck's rearview mirror. Thursday had passed in a blur of picking up a decent suit from a thrift store and avoiding phone calls from Joyce about last-minute details. Now Friday had arrived with the weight of finality I wasn't ready to bear. Inside the funeral home, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and whispered conversations. Joyce held court near the front entrance, surrounded by women in designer black and men in thousand suits. She'd transformed grief into a social occasion, complete with air kisses and meaningful glances. I signed the guest book with a pen that probably cost more than my daily grocery budget and took a seat in the back rows. From there, I could watch the theater unfold without becoming part of the performance. "Such a tragedy," one woman was saying to Joyce, "and so young." Joyce dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her makeup expertly applied to suggest tears without actually running. "Chad worked so hard his heart just couldn't take the stress." A businessman in an Italian suit approached with condolences. "Joyce, if there's anything you need help managing Chad's portfolio, his properties, you're so kind, Robert. I'll be handling everything personally." Of course, everything personally. Like Chad's life was a business she'd inherited along with his death. I watched her work the room, accepting sympathy like tribute. Each conversation a careful balance of performed grief and strategic networking. These people barely knew Chad as anything more than a name on contracts and charity event guest lists. Then I heard her voice drop to that conspiratorial whisper she thought was private. "Look at that old man over there," she murmured to a blonde woman who'd been hanging on her every word. Chad was so ashamed of him. The woman, Lisa, I think her name was glanced my way with unconcealed pity. "Joyce, surely he's grieving too. He barely visited. Now he wants to play loving father." Joyce's laugh was soft venom. "Chad told me his father never understood his success. Always made him feel guilty for improving his life." The words hit like slaps across the face. Whatever distance had grown between Chad and me, I'd never made him feel ashamed of what he'd accomplished. If anything, I'd been proud. Maybe too proud to tell him often enough. I stood up, my chair creaking in the funeral home silence. Joyce's conversation stopped as I approached their little circle of gossip and designer grief. "Joyce, this is inappropriate. Today we're bearing my son." Her expression shifted like a mask being adjusted. Suddenly, all wounded dignity. "Of course, Otis, I'm just emotional. You understand? We all grieve differently." Lisa looked uncomfortable, realizing she'd been caught participating in something ugly. Other conversations around us had stopped, waiting to see if family drama would erupt at a funeral. "Perhaps we should focus on Chad today," I said quietly, "not on our differences." Joyce nodded with fake solemnity, but her eyes promised retribution for my public correction. "You're absolutely right. Families should support each other in times like these." The minister called everyone to be seated for the service. I returned to my back row perch while Joyce took her place in the front, surrounded by supporters who would forget Chad's name within a month. "Chad Fox was a man who valued family above all else," the minister began, clearly working from notes Joyce had provided. "He built not just a business empire but lasting relationships." I stared at the casket, thinking about the boy who'd been so excited about that fish, who'd asked when he'd be as big as his dad. Somewhere between that backyard catch and this marble funeral home, I'd lost my son to a world that measured worth in zeros on bank statements. The service proceeded with hymns Chad never sang and readings from books he'd never opened. Joyce's performance peaked during the eulogy, her sobs perfectly timed for maximum effect. When people filed past the casket to pay respects, I waited until last. Standing there alone with Chad's closed casket, I whispered the things I should have said years ago. About being proud of him. About loving him despite our differences. About wishing I'd fought harder to stay part of his life, instead of letting Joyce's subtle hostility push me away. Outside, the funeral procession prepared to move to the cemetery. Joyce, surrounded by her supporters, was already discussing handling the legal matters after this sad business with someone who looked like a lawyer. I climbed into my truck to follow the procession, catching a glimpse of Joyce in her limousine through the window. She was checking her makeup in a compact mirror, already moving past grief toward whatever came next. Something cold settled in my stomach as I started the engine. Joyce was too confident, too eager to discuss Chad's financial affairs. Like she already knew exactly what those affairs contained. The mahogany conference table in Celia Grant's office felt as cold as the cemetery ground we just left behind, 42 floors above downtown LA. The late afternoon sun filtered through tinted windows, casting everything in a golden hue that somehow made the formal setting feel even more removed from reality. Joyce had ridden in the black limousine with her supporters, while I'd followed in my pickup, feeling like a funeral crasher at my own son's final ceremony. Now she sat at the head of the polished table, like she was chairing a board meeting. Her designer black dress perfectly arranged, not a hair out of place despite the emotional day. Celia Grant looked every inch the successful attorney D. Silver Ilver-aired expensive suit. The kind of calm confidence that came from decades of handling family crises. His office walls were lined with law books and diplomas that probably cost more than my annual income just to frame. "Thank you all for coming," Celia began, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd conducted hundreds of these readings. "I know this has been a difficult day." Joyce smoothed her skirt and checked her reflection in the window behind her. Even in grief, she was performing, making sure every angle was perfect for whatever audience she imagined was watching. "Otis, you don't need to stay," she said, not bothering to look at me directly. "Don't expect a single penny from my husband's $30 million anyway." The dismissal hit like a slap, but I'd grown used to her casual cruelty. I started to stand, my baseball cap clutched in weathered hands, when something made me pause. "I just want to hear Chad's final wishes." Chad's final wish was to provide for me, that's a wife's right. She cut me off with the authority of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "This is really just a formality." Lisa, the blonde friend who'd been hanging on Joyce's every word at the funeral, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Even Tyler, Chad's cousin from back east, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Celia arranged several legal documents on the table, each one bound with ribbon and bearing official seals. The afternoon light caught the gold embossing on the covers, making them look more like medieval scrolls than modern paperwork. "Please, everyone, take your seats," Celia said diplomatically. "Let's begin the reading." Joyce leaned over to whisper something to Lisa, her voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear. "This is just a formality. Chad told me he'd taken care of everything." I settled back into my leather chair, the expensive material creaking under my weight. Everything in this office screamed money and power, the kind of world Chad had built for himself. The kind of place where his old man had no business being. Mark, one of Chad's business partners, adjusted his tie nervously. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Cecile opened the first document, the paper crackling with the weight of legal authority. Joyce's confidence filled the room like expensive perfume. She sat straight back, hands folded, the picture of dignified grief mixed with anticipation. This was her moment of triumph, the culmination of 2 years as Chad's wife, the reward for enduring his occasionally difficult family. From where I sat, I could see the city stretching out below us through the massive windows. Somewhere down there was the garage where I used to teach Chad about engines, the cemetery where Margaret was buried, the motel where I'd spent last night, wondering how I'd failed as a father. Celia cleared his throat formally, adjusting his reading glasses as he prepared to begin. The late afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the polished conference table. The last will and testament of Chad Michael Fox, dated January 15, 2025. Joyce leaned forward expectantly, Here he's bright with anticipation. I sat back in my chair, resigned to hearing how thoroughly I'd been written out of my son's final chapter. Seal's voice carried across the silent conference room as he read the formal legal language that always preceded life-changing news. The afternoon light had shifted, casting sharp shadows across faces that would never look the same after the next few minutes. After careful consideration of my assets and relationships, Cecile continued, his professional tone giving no hint of the earthquake about to hit. I make the following bequests. Joyce's fingers drummed silently against the leather armrest, her wedding ring catching the light. She'd positioned herself like a queen receiving tribute, certain that each word would confirm her expectations. To my cousin Tyler Fox, I leave my collection of vintage wines valued at approximately $15,000. Seal paused while Tyler nodded gratefully. To my business partner, Mark Stevens, I leave my shares in the Riverside Development Project, valued at approximately $100,000 standard small bequests. Joyce's smile grew more confident with each minor gift to others, seeing them as proof that the real inheritance D, the millions D, would be hers alone. Seal turned to the next page, and something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His voice remained steady, but I caught him glancing at Joyce with what might have been sympathy. To my beloved father, Otis Fox, I leave the majority of my estate, including all business interests, stock portfolios, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $29 million. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Joyce's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out initially. That's impossible, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Seal continued reading as if he hadn't heard her, his professional training keeping him focused on the legal requirements. To my wife, Joyce Fox, I leave the Santa Monica condominium, valued at approximately $800,000, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein. Joyce's hand flew to her chest, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. The confident woman who dismissed me minutes earlier looked like she'd been physically struck. Chad, why would you? I heard myself saying, though the words felt disconnected from my thoughts. 29 million. The number was so large, it didn't seem real. This can't be right. Joyce's voice cracked as she leaned forward, gripping the edge of Thedable. Check the documents again. Others around the table exchanged shocked glances. Tyler's mouth hung open. Mark looked like he was calculating something in his head. Lisa stared at Joyce with obvious concern for her friend's mental state. Seal maintained his professional composure, though I could see the strain in his shoulders. The will was properly executed and witnessed, Mrs. Fox. These are Chad's legal wishes. Joyce began to tremble, her carefully constructed facade cracking like ice in spring. The woman who'd spent the day playing the grieving widow was being confronted with the reality that her husband had chosen his arranged father over her. My own hands were shaking as the implications hit me. 29 million was more money than I could comprehend, let alone manage. Why had Chad done this? We'd grown apart over the years, barely talked except for stilted holiday phone calls. There has to be some mistake, Joyce said again, but her voice carried less conviction now. The legal documents scattered across Seal's desk were official, stamped, impossible to argue with. Seal folded his hands on the table, waiting for the shock to settle before continuing with any additional provisions. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone processed what they just heard. Joyce stared at the legal documents like they were written in a foreign language, her mind clearly struggling to accept what had just happened to her expected future. The confidence that had carried her through the day had evaporated completely. I looked at my callous hands resting on the expensive conference table, trying to understand what my son had been thinking when he made these decisions. Somewhere in the distance, traffic hummed 42 floors below, the normal world continuing while ours had just been turned upside down. The silence shattered like expensive crystal when Joyce finally found her voice, rising from her chair with the fury of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. This is fraud. Her shout echoed off the office walls, making everyone jump. That old manipulated Chad when he was sick. I remained seated, trying to process both the inheritance and Joyce's explosive reaction. Joyce, I didn't even know about the will. Liar. She pointed an accusatory finger at me, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You always resented me, always poisoned Chad against me. Seal stood up, his professional calm finally showing strain. Mrs. Fox, this will was prepared according to all legal requirements. There was no coercion or manipulation involved. Joyce swept her arm across the conference table, sending legal documents scattering across the polished floor like expensive confetti. I was his wife. I loved him. I took care of him. I was building a life with him. Tyler and Mark pushed back from the table, clearly wanting to escape the family warfare erupting in front of them. Lisa sat frozen, watching her friend's complete breakdown with horrified fascination. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal my inheritance?" Joyce's voice was getting higher, more shrill with each accusation. "I know what you did. You manipulated a sick man who felt guilty about being a terrible father." The words stung because they carried enough truth to hurt. I had been distant. I had let work and small-town life keep me from Chad's world, but manipulation I'd barely seen him these past 2 years. "Joyce, please," I started, but she cut me off with another wave of fury. "Don't you dare, Joyce, please me." She grabbed her designer purse like a weapon, clutching it against her chest. I sacrificed everything for Chad. I gave up my modeling career. I moved to this city. I played the perfect wife to his business associates. Seal was gathering the scattered documents from the floor, trying to restore some semblance of professional order to the chaos. "Mrs. Fox, if you wish to contest the will, that's your legal right. But this outburst isn't helping anyone." "Contest it?" Joyce laughed, but it sounded more like breaking glass than humor. "I'm going to destroy it. No court is going to believe Chad would choose an absent father over the wife who stood by him." She spun toward the door, then turned back for one final attack. "You want to know why Chad married me, Otis? Because I made him feel valuable in ways you never could. Because I understood success and ambition, not just fixing broken-down trucks." The blow hit its mark. I felt every year of distance between Chad and me. Every missed visit, every phone call that ended too soon because we'd run out of things to say. "I'm not letting this stand," Joyce declared, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd never lost a fight. She really wanted to win. "You'll see me in court." She stormed toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. At the threshold, she turned back one last time, her face a mask of fury and determination. "This isn't over, old man. Not by a long shot." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. The conference room fell into shocked silence, the only sound coming from Cecile's careful gathering of the scattered legal papers. Tyler cleared his throat nervously. I have a flight to catch." Within minutes, the office had emptied except for Seal and me. I sat there staring at the scattered remains of Joyce's tantrum, wondering what my son had set in motion with his surprising final wishes. Through the windows, I could see the parking garage where Joyce was probably already making phone calls, mobilizing whatever forces she thought could overturn Chad's decision. The battle lines were drawn, and I was about to become the reluctant center of a war I'd never wanted to fight. Seal straightened his tie and began reorganizing his documents. "Mr. Fox," he said quietly, "I think you should know, Dee. This might get complicated." 3 days after Joyce stormed out of Cecile's office, I sat in my motel room staring at legal papers I barely understood. The Desert Inn had become my reluctant home. Its faded wallpaper and flickering neon sign a strange backdrop for decisions involving more money than I'd ever imagined. Seal had explained the process in terms a mechanic could grasp. Joyce was challenging the will on grounds of undue influence. Dee claiming I'd manipulated Chad during a vulnerable time. The accusation stung because it painted me as the kind of man I'd tried never to be. "She's hired Richard Stone," Seal had warned during our meeting that morning. "He's aggressive, expensive, and specializes in will contests. This won't be easy." Stone's reputation preceded him like a bad smell. 3 decades of courtroom victories built on emotional manipulation and legal technicalities. If Joyce wanted a shark, she'd found the perfect predator. By the end of the first week, Harlan had flown in from Texas, his presence filling the cramped motel room with the comfort of old friendship. He'd aged since I'd seen him last. More gray, deeper lines around his eyes, But his handshake was still firm, his resolve unshaken. "Joyce made a mistake hiring Stone," he said, unpacking his worn suitcase on the second bed. "Juries don't like lawyers who try too hard to manipulate them." Meanwhile, across town, Joyce was writing checks she couldn't afford to Stone's law firm. I learned this later, but at the time I could only imagine her desperation driving her to gamble everything on overturning Chad's decision. Stone's strategy became clear through the legal motions Seal showed me. Paint Chad as vulnerable, depressed, susceptible to his father's guilt-inducing visits. Make me look like a calculating manipulator who'd preyed on a sick son's emotions. The truth was simpler and more painful. Chad and I had grown apart over the years, our conversations becoming awkward exchanges of surface pleasantries. I hadn't visited more often before his death. If anything, I'd visited less, intimidated by his success and Joyce's obvious hostility. Seal gathered our evidence methodically. Medical records showing Chad's excellent mental health right up until his heart attack. Testimony from the notary who'd witnessed the will signing, confirming Chad's clear intentions. Business records proving his sharp decision-making continued until the day he died. The will was executed properly, Cecile assured me during one of our strategy sessions. Chad was of sound mind. The document is legally valid, and there's no evidence of coercion. But Stone wasn't fighting the facts. He was crafting a story. During depositions, he painted pictures of an arranged father, suddenly showing interest when his son became wealthy. He twisted normal family dynamics into sinister manipulation. Weeks into our preparation, the court date arrived, May 20th, 2025. The official notice felt heavier than it should have, the legal language making everything seem more final than death itself. Harlan found me that evening sitting on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the court summons. "Justice will win tomorrow, friend," he said quietly. Chad made his choice for reasons we may never fully understand, but it was his choice to make. I nodded, though uncertainty nodded at me like hunger. Had I somehow influenced Chad without realizing it? Had my working-class values and barely concealed disapproval of his lifestyle pushed him toward this dramatic gesture? "Maybe Joyce is right," I said. "Maybe I don't deserve this inheritance." Harlan's response was swift and certain. "That boy saw something in you worth trusting with $29 million. Don't dishonor his memory by doubting his judgment." Outside LA hummed with its endless energy. Millions of people pursuing their dreams while I prepared to defend an inheritance I'd never wanted. Tomorrow a judge would decide whether Chad's final wishes would stand or crumble under Joyce's legal assault. The marble steps of Los Angeles County Superior Court felt colder than the cemetery where we'd buried Chad a month ago. Aaron walked beside me, his presence steady as bedrock. While across the plaza, Joyce emerged from a black town car with Stone. Both of them dressed for victory. Courtroom 312 smelled of old wood and decades of legal battles. Judge Williams, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, commanded the room with quiet authority. She'd reviewed the case files. Cecile had told me, and wasn't known for suffering fools. Stone wasted no time in his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is about an elderly man who manipulated his vulnerable son during a period of depression and illness. Otis Fox preyed upon Chad Fox's guilt about their relationship to secure a massive inheritance he never earned or deserved. His voice carried the practiced rhythm of a preacher selling salvation, each word calculated for maximum emotional impact." Joyce sat beside him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The picture of grieving widow denied her rightful inheritance. Cecile's response was measured factual. Chad Fox was mentally competent when he executed this will 3 months before his death. He made a deliberate choice to provide for his father, and no evidence of undue influence exists beyond Ms. Fox's disappointment with her inheritance. Joyce took the stand first, her performance polished from weeks of preparation. She spoke of Chad's depression over their strained marriage, his guilt about disappointing his father, his vulnerable state in the months before his death. He became obsessed with making amends, she testified, her voice breaking at strategic moments. Otis would call and Chad would be upset for days afterward. He felt like he'd failed as a son. Stone guided her through a narrative that transformed normal family dynamics into psychological manipulation. Every phone call became coercion. Every expression of paternal love became emotional blackmail. When my turn came, I felt every eye in the courtroom measuring me against Joyce's accusations. My hands shook as I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "Mr. Fox," Cecile began gently, "how often did you visit your son in the months before his death?" "Maybe 3 times in 2 years," I admitted. "We talked on the phone for holidays, birthdays, but I didn't visit much." Joyce made it clear I wasn't welcome. "Did you ever ask your son for money?" "Never. I didn't even know he had as much as he did." Stone's cross-examination was brutal, designed to rattle me into admissions that supported Joyce's narrative. But 68 years of life had taught me the value of simple honesty. "Isn't it true, Mr. Fox, that you resented your son's success?" "I was proud of what Chad accomplished. Maybe I didn't understand his world, but I never resented it." "You disapproved of his marriage to Joyce, didn't you?" I paused, meeting Joyce's eyes across the courtroom. "I thought she married him for his money. Turns out I was right." The gallery stirred at my bluntness. Stone tried to paint it as evidence of my vindictive nature, but Judge Williams looked unmoved by his theatrics. The notary who'd witnessed Chad's will testified next, describing a man who seemed tired but determined. He knew exactly what he was doing, she said. Read every page. Ask specific questions about the language. His instructions were very clear. Medical testimony confirmed Chad's mental competence. Business records showed sharp decision-making right up until his death. Phone records disproved Joyce's claims about frequent manipulation calls from me. By afternoon, Stone's case was crumbling under the weight of facts. His closing argument grew increasingly desperate, appealing to emotion where evidence had failed. Don't let a grieving widow be cheated out of her rightful inheritance by a man who abandoned his son for decades, then swooped in like a vulture when money was involved. Seal's closing was simpler, more direct. Chad Fox made a choice. The evidence shows he was competent to make that choice. The court should honor his wishes, not overturn them based on speculation and disappointment. Judge Williams announced her recess with the gravity of someone about to change lives forever. Given the complexity of this case, the court will review all evidence overnight. I will render my decision tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. As we filed out, Joyce caught my arm in the hallway. This isn't over, old man, she hissed. Even if you win, you'll never be worthy of what Chad built. Her words followed me to the parking garage where Heron and I sat in my truck, neither of us able to speak. Tomorrow morning, everything would change one way or another. Sleep had been impossible. I sat in the motel parking lot at dawn, watching the sunrise paint the LA skyline gold, wondering if this was my last morning as a poor man or my first as someone who'd stolen what wasn't rightfully his. Harlan emerged from the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, his face showing the same sleepless night I'd endured. Whatever happens today, he said, settling beside me on the truck's tailgate, you've conducted yourself with honor. The drive back to court passed in silence, heavy with anticipation. Joyce and Stone were already there, huddled in intense conversation near the courthouse steps. She looked older somehow, the strain of the past month visible in lines that expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. Courtroom 312 felt different this morning. Charged with the electricity of impending judgment, Judge Williams entered with the measured pace of someone carrying the weight of Solomon's wisdom, her decision already rendered in private chambers. After careful review of all evidence and testimony presented, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. This court finds the will of Chad Michael Fox to be legally valid and executed with full mental competency. Joyce's sharp intake of breath cut through the formal atmosphere like breaking glass. Stone's face remained professionally neutral, but I caught him calculating appeal options behind his practiced composure. The testator clearly intended to leave his estate to his father, Judge Williams continued, and no credible evidence of undue influence has been presented. The disappointed expectations of an heir do not constitute grounds for overturning a properly executed will. Her gavel fell with finality that seemed to echo longer than physics should allow. The will stands as written. Case dismissed. In the hallway afterward, Joyce cornered me one last time, her composure finally cracking completely. This isn't over, old man. I'll appeal this travesty, Joyce, I said calmly, surprising myself with my steadiness. Chad made his choice. Maybe it's time to accept it and move on with your life. He never would have chosen you over me if you hadn't poisoned him against his own wife. Her voice carried the shrillness of complete defeat. Maybe he saw something. I'm only beginning to understand, I replied, the words coming from someplace I hadn't known existed. She stormed away, Stone trailing behind her with the resigned air of a lawyer, already mentally preparing his bill for services rendered. Their war was over, but I suspected Joyce would never truly surrender. At LAX, Harlan's departure gate felt like the end of an era. We'd been through something together that had tested the foundations of our 40-year friendship and found them solid as bedrock. Justice won today, friend, he said, gripping my shoulder with weathered hands. Chad would be proud of how you handled yourself. I still don't understand why he did this, I admitted. $29 million to a man who barely visited, barely called. Harlan's smile carried wisdom earned through decades of watching human nature play out in courtrooms and living rooms. Maybe that boy saw what I've always seen be a man worth trusting with anything, including the responsibility of wealth. The drive home to Texas stretched endless before me. 12 hours to process what my life had become. Somewhere around the New Mexico border, understanding began to dawn like sunrise after the longest night. Chad hadn't left me money because I'd manipulated him. He'd left it because I hadn't. In a world full of Joyce's D people, who saw him as a bank account with a heartbeat D, I'd remained the father who loved him for the boy he'd been, not the fortune he'd built. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was validation, protection from my old age, and proof that despite our distance, the love between father and son had survived everything Joyce's world could throw at it. Back in my garage 3 days later, I found myself staring at that same photograph of 8-year-old Chad holding his prize base. But now I saw something I'd missed before. D. Not just a proud boy with his catch, but the foundation of a man who'd grown up knowing he was loved unconditionally. "Thank you, boy," I whispered to the photo, my voice thick with understanding that had come almost too late. "I finally get what you were trying to tell me." Outside, Texas stretched under an endless sky, and for the first time in months, the future felt full of possibility instead of loss. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.